Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Sandile Simelane. I will be facilitating this session on youth mixed migration in gateway cities. I am a technical specialist with the UNFPA, New York. That's where I'm based in terms of work. And I'm pleased to be having the honor of facilitating this session. We have three presenters with us today who will take us through their different presentations. The first one to open us up on the list will be Helen Zwick. Helen is a regional coordinator of the Sahel Mixed Youth Mixed Migration Project. She's a PhD graduate in migration economics, and she is also an independent consultant. She will take us through a presentation on the overview of the Youth Mixed Migration Project, which was conducted by UNFPA in 3 transit cities in West Africa. That is Bamako, Ouagadougou, and in Niamey. So Helena, without wasting much time, let me hand over to you to take us through the first presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I cannot share my screen. Can I have this ability, please? Maybe Ravita? I'm not allowed to share my screen. Okay. So thank you very much, Sandile, for this introduction. I'm really pleased to participate in this session organized by the IUSSP International Population Conference. As you said, as the regional coordinator, I will provide you with a brief overview of the Sahel Youth Mixed Migration Project. My presentation will consist of 5 main points. First, I will present the project and its main objectives. Then I will share with you some background information on the migration dynamics in Sahel, Western Africa, where the project took place. This will allow me to justify the decision to focus on these 3 Western African cities that you just mentioned, Niamey in Niger, Ouagadougou in Burkina Faso, and Bamako in Mali. The methodology will be described in point 4, while last point of my presentation will focus on the findings and main recommendations. Regarding the project, the Youth Mixed Migration Project focuses on young international migrants aged between 15 and 29 years old who consider themselves in transit in different urban hubs. The project aims to study the socio-demographic characteristics of these young migrants, the drivers of their decision to migrate, their migration experiences, their vulnerabilities and needs, especially in terms of health, and in particular, sexual and reproductive health. This study takes place both en route, the migration journey, and in transit cities. There were 2 main phases so far. The first phase of the project took place in 2017-2018 in 4 different cities: in Beirut, Lebanon, Cairo, Egypt, Tunis in Tunisia, and Nairobi in Kenya. The second phase of this project took place in Sahel, 3 cities: Bamako, Niamey, and Ouagadougou. Before continuing talking about the project's finding itself, I would like to go back to an important concept, which is mixed migration.
Sorry, Hélène, you're muted.
Unmute. Do you hear me now?
Yes. And can you put your slides in full screen?
Yes.
Thank you.
1 minute. Is it okay? Yes. So I was telling you that I would like to go back to a recent term that has been used since the beginning of the 2000s year, which is mixed migration. Mixed migration is a term that aims to recognize the fact that there are different profiles of migrants that do use the same routes while moving around. There are economic migrants who seek better opportunities abroad, especially job opportunities, and asylum seekers or refugees who flee persecution and conflict. These migrants, refugees, and asylum seekers do not have the same legal status. They do use the same routes, but do not have the same needs, the same vulnerabilities. And it's very important to understand who they are, what their motivations are, and finally, what their needs in terms of protection and assistance are. In Western African region, there is a specific migration system. As of 2020, 7.5 million of migrants were located in the region, which represent 28% of total migrants who are located in Africa. In the region, the migratory system is quite specific. Why? Because in addition to economic migrants who usually move on a regular basis within the region, we now find refugees and asylum seekers who do use the same routes. The complexity of this migration system needs to be understood. Also, while studying the characteristics of this migration system, we discovered that most of the migrants and refugees in the region on the move are willing or aspire to stay within the region. The estimates announce or state that only 20% of the migrants in the region aspire to move to Europe or to other Western countries. And among these 20% who aspire to move abroad, only a few would cross the Mediterranean Sea. Within the West African region, there are 3 specific countries that we focused on: Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso. Due to their specific location, these countries became not only immigration and emigration countries, but also transit countries. This means that migrants and refugees would settle for a while in these countries before moving along to other countries. The 3 countries are also among the youngest in the world. For instance, in Burkina Faso, the average age of the population is slightly above 17 years old. In Niger, slightly above 15 years old, and in Mali, slightly above 16 years old. In terms of urbanization, the countries are also quite dynamic, which means that people on the move are on average also quite young and attracted by the cities, which are source of opportunities, but also challenges. That's why we found important to study young migrants in urban areas in the 3 cities of interest. Large-scale and high-quality data on migration movement in the regions remain scarce, which means that the understanding and knowledge about these migrants on the move in urban hubs remain limited. As a consequence, current frameworks and practices to answer migrants' sexual and reproductive health rights in terms of protection remain ineffective and rudimentary. This leads us to the project's main objectives. The first objective of the project in the region was to collect data on the policy and service needs of young international migrants in the transit cities, with a specific focus on access to essential needs and services, including these sexual and reproductive health, identification, documentation, but also protection, including from gender-based violence. The second objective of the project was to contribute to UNFPA's and the Danish Refugee Council's policy engagement in international migration dialogues on the national, regional, and international levels. Finally, the project aimed to shape existing and future UNFPA programs in urban mixed migration health. How did we proceed to collect data? UNFPA partnered with the Mixed Migration Center of the Danish Refugee Council. The MMC is a leading source for independent and high quality data, research, analysis, and expertise on mixed migration. We used the methodology which is called the 4MI of the Mixed Migration Center. Together, we decided to adopt a mixed method approach with 2 main phases. The first phase consisted of collecting quantitative data using a structured questionnaire. The second phase of this methodology consisted of collecting qualitative data. Regarding the first phase, collecting quantitative data, we used and designed and administered a questionnaire over the phone. We collected 2008 responses, and this took place in 2020. The target population had the following criteria. Young refugees and migrants were aged between 15 and 29 years, were not nationals of the country of study, were present in one of the 3 cities of interest during the interview. They also crossed an international border and considered themselves in transit at the time of the interview. For the needs of the study, we used the purposive and snowballing sampling. Participation in the study was voluntary, anonymous, and the participants were allowed to stop the interview whenever they would ask for. Regarding the characteristics of the sample, you have here some indications. 61% were male, 39% female. In terms of distribution, you have also an indication, 35% came from Bamako, 39% located in Ouagadougou, while in Niamey, we had 26% of the respondents. The second phase consisted of collecting qualitative data. Clémence will talk more about it, but I will give you some insights right now. It consisted of 59 interviews involving more than 81 respondents. Some were key informants 28% of the sample, and some were young migrants and refugees, 70%. In-depth interviews, focus group discussions, and key informant interviews were the methods used to collect these qualitative data. Once we get the data, we need to decide about the methods to analyze them. For the quantitative data, we used different methods. They are listed here, especially exploratory data analysis, analysis by topics, and some regressions were conducted to explore relationship between different variables. Regarding the qualitative data, we decided to analyze them through a hybrid thematic analysis. The key findings are now shown on that slide. I will go through them, and I invite you to have a look at the report, the regional and national reports regarding more findings. So the first finding is related to the drivers of the migration decision. We found that the main drivers of migration decision were economic. Migrants and refugees decided to leave their origin country because of economic opportunities that they would find abroad. However, we also found that the decision to leave the country of origin is more complex than that. In addition to economic reasons, there were personal and educational reasons as well. The qualitative data indicated that in addition to these reasons, there were also sexual and reproductive health related reasons, such as unintended pregnancies or sexual orientation. Second finding shows that migration in the transit hubs was mainly intra-regional and regular. Most respondents moved within the region carrying valid identity documentations. Most respondents as well aspired to remain in Africa, either returning home or by migrating to another African country, especially Algeria and Libya. Third finding is related to perceived risks for minors. We asked the respondents what could be the main risks for minors on the road, but also in the transit hub. The responses differed across gender and also across age groups. Female respondents would see more risks and would also report more risks based on gender-based violence, like sexual violence, than male. Finding number 4, we found that there was a gap between type of assistance received and type of assistance required. Respondents mentioned water and food as the most frequent type of assistance they received while being on the road. On the contrary, the respondents mentioned mainly a need for cash, for food, and for medical assistance. Finding number 5 is related to the experience of our respondents in the transit hub. Overall, we found that the respondents feel safe in the transit city. It was about 80% of our sample. We assume that this positive experience in the transit hub was related to the fact that the migrants and refugees move on a regular basis, carrying valid identity documentation. And we also saw in the findings that most respondents with a lack of valid documentation tended to feel less safe in the transit hub than other respondents. Finding number 6 is related to the access to health care facilities. For a majority of respondents, they have access to such facilities. The results suggest as well that those who lack proper documentation tends to access less often to these facilities than the other respondents. The lack of money remains the main barrier to access healthcare. Finding number 7, respondents have access to sexual and reproductive health services in the urban transit hubs, but they do express a need for information in that field. Finding number 8, while being asked what type of contraceptive methods they do know, we found that the majority of respondents do have a broad knowledge about the methods. Finding number 7 is related to transactional sex. We found that transactional sex, which is also closely related to HIV and gender-based violence, is a practice that is quite common in the region, and even more common among respondents based in Niamey, Niger, among women and among the youth between 18 and 24 years of age. Another finding shows that while a majority of respondents reported having tested for HIV at least once in their life, there are a majority willing also to take the test if they could. Overall, the impact of COVID-19 pandemic on health, and in particular on sexual and reproductive health and health rights, is limited. So these are the main findings that I wanted to share with you today. In terms of recommendation, I included 6 of them. They are quite broad. In the reports, you will find actions that are associated to these broad recommendations. Recommendation number 1 is related to the data. We recommend to enhance efforts to regularly collect accurate, updated, and disaggregated data to improve systematic evidence on youth mixed migration in the region. The second recommendation aims to pursue efforts to increase and also strengthen pathways for regular migration in Western Africa. Recommendation number 3 aims to strengthen assistance provision and protection to young migrants en route their migration journeys. Recommendation number 4, promote access to information on sexual and reproductive health to assist young migrants in accessing contraceptive use, HIV tests, and family planning in general. Another recommendation is related to transactional sex, and we do recommend to generate knowledge and advocacy, but also to enhance efforts to prevent and combat transactional sex and also other forms of gender-based violence in Western Africa. Finally, we recommend to expand and foster collaboration and coordination among the key stakeholders and government in the region. Thank you very much for your attention. And of course, I remain available for any questions that you may have. Over to you, Sandile.
Thank you, Helen, for that detailed, elaborate, and informative presentation. I saw text on the chat saying at some point in the last slide or so, some colleagues lost audio. I just want to confirm if everyone can hear me at this point. Okay, yeah, I see a note. Thank you again, Helen. For that detailed presentation, including action-oriented recommendations that the report makes.
that need to be followed up. I'm sure the audience, the colleagues on the floor will have questions and robust interactions on what you have presented. Our next presenter, colleagues, is going to be Clemens Kopeikin, who will present the qualitative aspect of what Helen has just presented. Clemens has more than six years of experience in coordination and research in humanitarian and international cooperation projects, and she's an accomplished researcher in that she balances both qualitative and quantitative research methodologies, even though her work has mainly concentrated on qualitative and participatory approaches with specific interest on sexual and reproductive rights, gender, and education. Clemens, you can start sharing your slide. As I go to the final bit of the introduction. Clemens has a BA in international relations and a master's in public health from universities in the US, Spain, and Denmark. Over to you, Clemens. Thank you. If you could go to presentation mode, please.
Yeah, Clemence, you're muted. Yeah.
Okay, can you see the screen and hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, first of all, thank you very much for the introduction, Sandile and Helen, for the general presentation of the project, and thank you all for the opportunity to be here. I will verbally present in English, and my presentation is in French, so hopefully that will be okay. Yes, I'll be presenting the qualitative segment. I am the research lead of the qualitative segment of this project, working with the Mixed Migration Center, which is a research center that is a part of DRC, the Danish Refugee Council. Of course, UNFPA, MMC, and DRC are joint partners in this project. I will present a reduced version of a report that will be published. There's more parts about the technical aspects that are not going to be presented today, as well as a discussion section, and the results, only a highlight of some of the results will be presented today. So I highly encourage you to also definitely have a look at the report when it's ready. I will just breeze through the objectives of the study, as Helen already discussed this, so that we can more focus on the results section. So as we know, the objective of the study is to better understand the experiences of young migrants and refugees in transit cities in West Africa. The cities that we focused on were the capitals of Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso. And the objective is to not only understand their human experiences, but also identify their needs, priorities, and recommendations for SSR services. So we wanted to better understand and contextualize the risks that they face on their journeys and in transit cities, to understand specifically what are the SSR needs, to better understand what access they have to sexual and reproductive health services, to triangulate and contextualize the quantitative section results, and also a participatory approach to be able to gather their personal recommendations from their point of view of how we can better deliver SSR services to this target group in West Africa. The methodology of this part of the study was dialogue. That is the simple way of saying that we had in-depth discussions with the target group, which are young refugees and migrants between the age of 15 and 24. You will notice that the age segment was more focused in this part of the study. As we were going to have less participants, we wanted to also have a more specific understanding of how the issues of SSR impact this age group. The key informants were people who had an in-depth knowledge of this population, as well as reproductive health services in these cities. So what that really meant is that we had anyone from service providers in primary healthcare to people working in NGOs, national and international, who worked with this target group and who provided SSR services to them. We also had decision makers from public institutions, such as different ministries that work with youth health and SSR, participate in the study. The total amount of participants in this part of the study was 58 youth and 23 key informants, which made a total of 81 participants. Now I will just go quickly through some of the particular aspects of the methodology. We have our research team here. Of course, in doing a gender response approach, we made sure that men had these conversations with men and women had these conversations with women. I think for obvious reasons I will not explain. So of course, the team underwent training before carrying out the field work on different technical aspects of how to manage these interviews, the reproductive health laws in each country, the protocols, the research tools, etc. Consider ethical considerations. So of course, the participants were made aware of their rights. Consent was considered for the most appropriate way for each type of participant in the study. We also had a reference system. So if we came across, and of course, as you can imagine, given the nature of the study, we came across vulnerable cases in terms of mental health and GBV cases, as well as providing SSR services. We had a referencing system in each of 3 cities. The data was analyzed through thematic analysis with the use of the NVivo software. This allowed us to identify patterns in the data, and I think I won't go into too much detail about that, so we can focus on the results. Now, I think this would actually be a good opportunity if it is possible to, or maybe, yeah, I'm not sure if it's possible to try to hear a few minutes of one of the audio recordings of one of the participants. I'm not sure if this is possible. I'm not hearing it. I'm not sure if others are hearing it.
Donc, j'ai le problème que j'ai eu avec mon ami avec qui j'ai pris la route. Ma mère n'a pas pu supporter le coup. D'accord. Il est bien vrai qu'elle était déjà malade. Elle n'a pas pu supporter. Elle est morte. Et c'est comme ça que mon parrain m'a mis dehors. Et mon ami là aussi, sa famille lui a mis dehors. On a pris la route, lui et moi. Donc, je n'avais pas les idées de prendre la route de l'aventure.
D'accord.
C'est pour ça qu'on a pris la route, arrivé au désert, le monsieur, dans le coxeur,
Oui.
le passant est parti nous abandonner en plein désert.
D'accord.
On était au nombre de 7. Il y a une femme camerounaise qui est morte et mon ami aussi, il est mort. Moi, je ne me sentais pas bien. Voilà pourquoi j'ai préféré faire demi-tour, rentrer à Niamey pour chercher de l'aide.
D'accord.
L'arrivée de l'aide, j'ai été coincé jusqu'aujourd'hui.
D'accord.
Moi, je ne me sentais pas bien puisque moi, quittant d'abord chez moi, j'étais malade.
De côté souffrait de quoi?
Du VIH.
Ok.
J'étais malade. Donc là, il fallait que je n'avais plus de comprimés. Et là, je faisais déjà la maladie. Et j'avais aussi peur. Il fallait que je rentre. J'arrive dans une ville où je peux chercher de l'aide. Il est bien vrai que c'est illégal en Afrique parce qu'on n'accepte pas ça en Afrique. Mais on a quand même des centres au Cameroun, des centres entre gays. Bon, vous pouvez célébrer vos choses comme vous voulez au niveau des femmes parce que c'est en secret. C'est comme ça que mon ami et moi, on a célébré un petit mariage, lui et moi, entre nous, les gays. Je ne sais pas comment la rumeur est arrivée jusqu'à arriver dans nos familles. C'est comme ça que ma mère m'a appelé pour me demander. Je lui ai dit que non, c'est faux, que l'histoire n'est pas vraie. Mais comme elle me faisait tellement confiance, elle a cru en moi. Bon, moi, j'avais la chambre de dehors. C'est comme ça que j'ai donc été attrapé avec le même gars que j'ai eu l'histoire de l'alliance avec lui. C'est comme ça que j'ai été attrapé avec ma tante qui habitait aussi dans la même maison. C'est elle qui part informer ma mère. C'est comme ça que tout le voisinage sort et on nous trouve dans la chambre. On a été bastonnés, bien même. Un peu torturé, j'étais dehors. Les contrôles qu'on trouvait en route de la police, tout ça là, on nous demandait de l'argent, ce n'était pas facile. On nous menaçait de nous faire retourner en arrière si on ne donnait pas l'argent, si on n'avait pas les papiers. Donc, puisqu'on n'avait aucune pièce d'identité sur nous.
Okay, thank you very much. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. So I'm not sure if, I hope there was a simultaneous translation for that. This is just one of the 58 youth migrants and refugees with who we spoke to. So you can see the link in SSR Needs from the very beginning of his story and the reason why he decided to leave his home country. So he talked about his sexual orientation not being accepted and the reason for which he decided to leave. He also talks about being without treatment for HIV throughout his journey, then having troubles with bribes and other types of incidents along his journey. And he then talks about arriving to Niamey, where he finally has an encounter with the Red Cross. He's able to get a treatment for HIV, but he also mentions that he has an STI that went without treatment. We weren't really sure why the Red Cross wasn't able, maybe they were out of stock or they just didn't have that specific treatment. In any case, this goes to show that while this participant talked about having a very positive experience with those services, there were still gaps in care. And this is just one example of maybe a respondent in the quantitative section who says, yes, I was able to access services, but there are still some needs that weren't able to be addressed. We have another participant who I wanted to focus on, who is from Benin, 24 years old, who we met in Ouagadougou, the capital of Burkina Faso. She talks about leaving her home country because of not having economic opportunities, and her family living in poverty. Then she goes on to talk about how she uses transactional sex or sex for survival to be able to travel. So she doesn't have, she talks about not having enough to eat and definitely not having resources to travel, but not feeling like she had any other opportunities. So she uses this exchange of sexual favors to be able to reach a new destination. Now, upon arriving to Ouagadougou, she also decides to work in sex work for the same reason, not feeling like there's any other way to be able to save money, to be able to continue on her journey. This is when she describes many different types of violences that sex workers are often subjected to, as well as an abortion story that she shares with us. And I will say that at the beginning of the interview, the participant did not want to share this story, but as she felt more comfortable with the respondent, she did open up to us about that experience. And I think this is something that why mixed methods is very important, because for some of the more sensitive topics, they might not be able to be captured with different types of dynamics or other methods. Now I will try to fly through the results. I'll present the results in 7 themes. The reasons for departure are the motivations for migration, the conditions, the life conditions and incidents that protections incidents that youth are subjected to along their journeys and in migrant cities, as well as negative results in sexual and reproductive health. I will also talk about experiences with the SSR services in the transit cities, the participants' opinions with regards to reproductive health and rights, and finally, their needs and recommendations. So I won't focus too much on this, as this was already stated very much in Helen's presentation. But we are very familiar with often hearing about the economic lack of economic opportunities or seeking better economic opportunities, armed conflict, these different types of reasons. We were able to also document different reasons linked to reproductive health, such as stigma, which some participants face in their communities due to either their sexual orientation or having a pregnancy outside of marriage, or trying to avoid a forced marriage, or a specific violence against women in the context of armed conflict. The conditions in which youth described the living conditions that they described while on the migratory route or in transit cities were mixed, as we had different participants from different levels of vulnerability. But we will say that most of them talked about having difficult hardships economically, even in some moments having being food insecure, having problems with finding secure places to live. Some of them even describe sleeping on the street at different points, or facing risks when in shelters, and specifically for the protection of youth and migrants. Some instances of girls, young girls being victim of sexual violence in those centers. We also have exploitation and different types of exploitation which were documented, such as labor exploitation and sexual exploitation. Of course, there are many accounts of physical and sexual violence, with an emphasis on physical violence for men and sexual violence for women. However, we had many cases of physical violence for women and we also had several cases of sexual violence for men. Corruption was cross-cutting, except for the few participants who traveled by plane. However, many other participants talked about corruption, especially at borders, the threat of having their papers taken away, being imprisoned, and even more stronger cases of police and authority abuse, such as cases of sexual violence. Due to the often difficult living conditions, the break-ins and robbery were quite frequent among our participants. So many of them faced many different types of violence across their journey and in the transit cities. As you can imagine, this brings us to the next chapter of our results, which is the negative results in reproductive health. So these difficult living conditions clearly have consequences in terms of undesired pregnancies, infections, STIs, HIV, and other types of infections that are due to living in conditions where hygiene is sometimes is considered a privilege, where you have many people living in the same places. Sexual violence was documented, of course, which we already talked about, as well as sex work and survival sex. Many cases of abortion, maternal mortality, abandoning of children, and infanticide was also documented as a result of the unwanted pregnancies, as well as STIs that were not treated, which later turned into more serious types of health conditions. So unfortunately, I don't have the time to read the quotes. So I really invite you to dig into the results and read the testimonies for yourself. Unfortunately, I will have to try to wrap up my presentation in the next 3 minutes. So I will just go on to the next section, which is barriers and facilitators. So we asked you to tell us about their experiences with sexual and reproductive health services in the transit cities. Many of them had very little to no experience. That's to say, maybe they went and bought condoms in a pharmacy, and that was the most experience that they had in the city. Others had more easier access depending on their circumstance. So we were able to document what facilitated the access to these services and what were barriers. I think I will invite you to go refer to the report for the facilitators, and I will just quickly go through the barriers. So lack of financial means, whether that be to purchase the services and products, even in Burkina Faso, which is the country that has the most amount of these type of services subsidized. The financial barrier was still very much important in that context and across all three contexts. Most importantly, for treating different types of infections, participants often just didn't have the means to be able to move around in the city, to be informed, and to be able to purchase and pay for these services. The lack of information, this can be about existing services, about how to reach them, even if they are free, do we know they exist? And also the lack of information in general on reproductive health. So there were some pretty important misconceptions that were also gathered among participants, even if they were aware of some reproductive health services and contraceptives. We also documented quite a number of misconceptions on contraceptives, for example. Stigma was on a threefold level. It could start from the social cultural barriers that the youth have themselves of their ideas of sexuality. Then it can also be the service providers or the communities that they're transiting in. There was also documented a negative practice in GBV care, which is the testing. So essentially, a person cannot access care unless it is confirmed that they have been violated. So some of these practices were documented in all 3 countries. While abortion is not illegal in the 3 countries, under the law, it is supposed to be accessible in certain circumstances. But we found that in practice, even these limited conditions were not accessible. The lack of youth adapted services and adapted to migrant needs was also noted. So there are a vast amount of different partners working on this, and the public sector is also invested in youth-specific services. So this is well noted. What we found is that also compared to the demand, there was a lack of services, of adapted services. Youth also depend on informal, clandestine, and traditional services. So we must not forget that we're not just talking about formal healthcare services. And finally, we were able to document a vast amount of different types of ideas when it comes to reproductive rights. That means who has the decision-making power when it comes to using contraceptives, number of children, the right to access different types of care. This was a debate that we found many different types of responses to, including in the healthcare providers who themselves shared some experience of these opinions impacting care. So, for example, someone stigmatizing someone, a male who is homosexual, who's coming to be treated for an incident of sexual violence, may be turned away if that care provider, if that provider is not agreeing with, is stigmatizing him for his sexuality. Also, many healthcare providers do not agree with abortion. So while supposedly it is supposed to be accessible, for example, in Mali and Burkina Faso for victims of sexual violence, this opinion may also be a type of barrier that might be faced for youth. So I'll invite you to look at the report for all the specific services, and not only services, but also different types of support that will that the youth and key informants shared with us in regards to how we can improve the SSR situation for them, and as well as their recommendations, as well as my recommendations. Unfortunately, I have to leave. But it was a pleasure, and it was a pleasure to be here today. And I would actually be very happy to share my contact in case anyone has any specific questions related to this part of the study. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Clemence, for squeezing in that very lengthy but very interesting analysis into the limited time that we had. As Clemence indicated, colleagues, she will not be available to stay with us to take questions, but we will be able, we can take the questions and hand over to her for further interaction. Thank you, Clemence.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Our next speaker is Abdullah Idrissa Bukari, who is from the National Institute of Statistics in Niger. He is the head of Demographic Studies division in that institution. He's gonna present our final talk for the day, and then we will hand over to our discussant, Professor Papa Dembafol, afterwards. Idrissa, if you could try to be brief. We are running a little bit behind time, so that we can have a little bit of time at the end for the discussion and Q&A. Over to you, Idris. Can you share your presentation? Abdullah, you are muted if you are speaking. Hi, Idrissa, we can see you. Can you hear us? Ravita, are you able to unmute? Oh, there it comes.
Oui, bonsoir. Allô?
We can hear you.
D'accord, je vais partager mon écran. Est-ce que vous voyez mon écran?
Oui. Vous pouvez mettre la présentation
Yes, we
en plein
can.
écran.
Please put it on presentation mode. Thank you.
Comme ça, c'est bon?
En bas à droite. C'est bien.
Ça va comme ça?
Yes, it is.
Ok.
Thank you.
Ok, donc bonjour à tous. Moi, c'est Idrissa Boukari Abdoulaye. Donc, je suis chef de division études démographiques à l'INS et membre du comité ayant élaboré donc, le rapport de l'enquête sur les migrations et les besoins des jeunes migrants en transit de 15-29 ans à Niamey au Niger. Donc, je vais vous présenter les résultats de cette enquête. Ça, c'est le plan de la présentation. Nous allons commencer le contexte, les objectifs de l'enquête, le cas de mise en œuvre de l'enquête, la structure du rapport, les principaux résultats par chapitre. Enfin, nous finirons par les conclusions et les recommandations. Bon, contexte. Donc, le Niger est un vaste pays situé au cœur du Sahel avec une superficie de 1 267 000 km² et partage une longue frontière de 5 600 km avec ces 7 pays limitrophes que sont l'Algérie, l'Algérie, le Bénin, le Burkina, la Libye, le Mali, le Nigeria et le Tchad. L'économie est peu diversifiée, dépendant de l'agriculture pour 40% de son PIB. Nous notons une forte croissance démographique avec comme conséquence l'arrivée massive des jeunes Nigériens à la recherche d'emploi décent. La population du Niger est estimée à 22,7 millions d'habitants en 2020, donc selon les projections démographiques de l'INS. Le taux de chômage est de l'ordre de 28,8% des personnes âgées de 15 ans et plus, et elle varie d'une région à l'autre. L'incidence de la pauvreté a diminué de 7,4 points de pourcentage au plan national en 2011 et 2019. Donc ça, c'est l'enquête ECVMA, passant de 42,2% à 40,8%. Le niveau d'extrême pauvreté est estimé à 42,9% en 2020 et concerne plus de 10 millions de personnes. Actuellement, le Niger fait face à un afflux de réfugiés fuyant les conflits, notamment du Nigeria, du Mali, et la crise a engendré en 2020 la mort de 5 000 personnes. En février 2021, le Haut Commissariat des Nations Unies pour les réfugiés recensait 241 321 réfugiés et 320 personnes déplacées sur le territoire nigérien. Et nous notons néanmoins l'existence d'un cadre institutionnel, politique et législatif assez fourni, se traduisant par l'adoption et ou la signature de plusieurs textes et règlements au niveau national, régional et international. Donc notamment la politique nationale de la population, la politique nationale de la migration qui a été adaptée, validée par le gouvernement en septembre 2020, le Pacte mondial sur les migrations sûres. Donc voilà ce qu'on peut dire sur le contexte. Donc, les objectifs, j'en passe parce que en fait, Hélène a eu déjà à présenter ça. C'est pareil pour les trois pays, les trois villes où il y a eu l'enquête. Donc je vais passer là-dessus. Donc comme activité réalisée, il y a la note de cartographie des parties prenantes, le suivi des réunions hebdomadaires virtuelles avec Wakaro de Dakar, la mise en place d'un comité technique de suivi du projet qui regroupe toutes les parties prenantes, la production de différents rapports périodiques, l'élaboration du module sur la COVID-19, la conception du second dossier adressé au Centre national de recherche sur la santé. C'est le comité d'éthique en fait de recherche sur la santé sur le questionnaire parce que il fallait présenter donc un dossier pour que ça soit validé et comme c'est des sensibles, donc il faut passer par ce comité-là. Et il y a l'intégration au groupe du travail sur la migration et les réunions en ligne. Il y a eu la supervision et la collecte des données en Niamey avec un rapport avec DRC, donc du 10 novembre au 10 décembre 2020. Et enfin, il y a eu le traitement, l'analyse des données et la rédaction du rapport de l'enquête. Alors, le bilan de l'enquête au Niger, il y a 36% des effectifs des répondants des trois pays, soit 718 entretiens, parmi lesquels 34% de femmes. Voilà donc la répartition hommes-femmes que vous avez devant vous. Et voilà, au total, donc, pour les trois pays, 2008 entretiens, avec 718 pour le Niger, soit 36%, comme je disais tantôt. Donc, parmi lesquels il y a 34% de femmes. Donc, le chapitre 1 va aborder le contexte général. Le chapitre 2, l'approche méthodologique. Chapitre 3, profil des migrants et leur parcours migratoire. Chapitre 4, les contraintes et stratégies des migrants. Le chapitre 5 va parler des connaissances, attitudes et pratiques des migrants en matière de santé sexuelle et reproductive dans un contexte de COVID. Enfin, nous finirons par une conclusion et des recommandations. Donc, pour les caractéristiques des migrants, nous pouvons dire que l'âge moyen des migrants est autour de 23,4 ans et la population féminine des migrants semble plus jeune, avec un âge moyen de 22,76 ans contre 23,73 ans pour les jeunes hommes. Alors, 116% des migrants célibataires, contre 12% de mariés. La proportion des femmes divorcées, 4% vaut 2 fois celle des hommes, qui est de 2%. Alors, 116% des migrants alphabétisés et 24% analphabètes. Alors, quel que soit le niveau d'instruction considéré, il ressort que les femmes migrantes sont faiblement représentées et l'écart se creuse entre hommes et femmes lorsqu'on passe du niveau primaire au niveau supérieur. Par ailleurs, 97% des migrants se déplacent avec au moins un document valide et officiel de voyage, contre 3% qui se déplacent sans aucun document officiel. Donc, on attend par document officiel, une carte d'identité, un passeport, etc. Donc, 44% des migrants justifient leur déplacement pour des raisons économiques. Et l'activité principale dans les pays de départ tourne autour du commerce pour 26% des migrants. Alors, les femmes sont beaucoup plus représentées dans la restauration, l'hôtellerie et comme employées de maison. Donc, ici, nous avons un graphique qui montre le pays du début de la migration. Donc, sur les 716 répondants, ce questionnaire réparti en pays considérés, il y a 3 pays sur 5 qui sont de l'Afrique de l'Ouest et les autres sont de l'Afrique centrale ou du Maghreb. Donc, on remarque que plus d'un migrant sur 2, soit 54%, ont évité leur migration à partir de 4 pays limitrophes du Niger, à savoir le Bénin avec 17%, le Burkina 16%, le Mali 12%, le Nigeria 9%. Alors, un autre pays qui se distingue du lot des limitrophes et des pays non limitrophes du Niger est la Côte d'Ivoire. Voilà, donc qui vient en quatrième position, en quatrième position avec 11,5%. Selon le parcours migratoire, donc les données montrent que les femmes sont plus motivées à quitter le pays d'origine, plus que les hommes pour des raisons personnelles ou familiales, de violence ou de discrimination. Donc, ce qui est tout à fait logique parce que les femmes sont plus violentées et sont plus discriminées par rapport aux hommes. Donc, c'est logique. Alors, 111% des migrants ont voyagé en groupe et dans 19% des cas avec des amis du pays d'origine. 25% ont utilisé les services d'un passeur et ont payé en moyenne 44 000 par migrant, donc ce qui n'est pas négligeable comme somme payée. 37% des migrants ont utilisé leur propre économie pour financer le voyage, tandis que 21% ont financé leur voyage grâce à l'appui financier de la famille ou des amis. 18% des migrants donc, ont choisi Niamey comme ville de transit pour des questions pratiques et logiques de leur itinéraire, alors que 20% estiment que leur choix a été guidé par des opportunités économiques. Enfin, donc 93% des migrants déclarent qu'ils sont en sécurité à Niamey, contre 7% qui affirment le contraire. Alors donc ici, nous avons un graphique qui présente le pays de destination finale des migrants. Donc on voit bien que les pays de destination finale sont autour de 41% des cas, des pays européens. Et lorsqu'on ajoute les pays maghrébiens, ça tourne autour de 75%. Donc 41 plus 34. Et si on prend individuellement ces pays-là, l'Algérie, la Libye et l'Italie viennent en tête avec respectivement 16, 15 et 12%. Et ça ne sort pas dans ce graphique, mais nous avons ça dans le rapport. Alors, les pays d'Afrique du Sud du Sahara viennent en troisième position comme pays de destination finale avec 17%. Donc, nous allons voir à présent les risques au cours du voyage. Alors, les principaux risques pour les enfants de moins de 18 ans et les plus cités par les migrants sont la violence physique et sexuelle dans 11% des cas et la détention dans 7% des cas. Alors, 34% des migrants en transit pensent qu'il n'y a aucun risque pour les enfants de moins de 18 ans et en transit. Et 26% des migrants déclarent avoir reçu de l'assistance durant le parcours migratoire, comprenant l'eau, un abri pour se loger, la nourriture, les soins médicaux, le soutien psychologique, psychosocial et l'assistance juridique, etc. Donc, nous passons au prochain point sur la santé. des migrants en lien avec Covid. On remarque que 66% des migrants estiment que leur état de santé n'a pas changé par rapport à leur pays d'origine. 23% estiment que leur état de santé est meilleur alors que 11% d'entre eux estiment que leur état de santé est encore pire que dans leur pays d'origine. 99% des migrants ont entendu parler de la COVID-19 et ont cité au moins un symptôme de la maladie. Mais 27% d'entre eux estiment qu'ils ne peuvent pas accéder aux soins nécessaires au cas où ils présentent des signes de la COVID. 64% des migrants déclarent avoir perdu une partie de leurs revenus en restriction à la COVID-19. Et enfin, 83% des migrants pensent que la COVID-19 a augmenté les coûts de la vie et du parcours migratoire. Donc, passons aux migrants en lien avec la santé sexuelle et reproductive. Donc, nous notons que 28% des migrants souhaitent avoir et 3% d'entre eux ne veulent pas du tout en avoir. L'accès à l'information constitue donc plus d'un quart des migrants, soit 26%, les besoins en SSR. Et 42% des migrants ont au moins une fois visité un établissement de santé ou un professionnel de la santé dans la ville de Niamey et le plus souvent pour des besoins non liés à la SSR, dans 37% des cas. 44% des migrants estiment que les services de santé de la ville de Niamey répondent aux besoins en santé sexuelle et reproductive des jeunes migrants. Et 93% affirment avoir reçu les services pour lesquels ils ont visité les services de santé à Niamey. Et enfin, donc 7% des migrants ont interrompu un traitement lié à la SSR à cause de la COVID-19. Donc 2% de ces migrants déclarent avoir eu un enfant dans la ville de Niamey avec les consultations pré-postnatales nécessaires dans des services de santé appropriés. Alors pour les protections hygiéniques, 29% des migrants utilisent les serviettes hygiéniques et 119% d'entre eux savent où se les procurer à Niamey et 16% affirment avoir les moyens d'en acheter. 16% des migrants et ou partenaires savent où se procurer les produits contraceptifs dans la ville de Niamey et 15% d'entre eux estiment avoir les moyens pour se les procurer. 64% des migrants savent où obtenir un test de grossesse en cas de besoin. Alors, les migrants n'ayant jamais utilisé ou utilisant rarement une méthode de contraception avancent comme argument. Alors, la religion peut être un obstacle, l'opposition du partenaire, parfois ils disent que c'est inconfortable, et aussi il y a le manque de connaissance de certaines méthodes contraceptives. Donc, ici, nous avons un graphique qui présente la connaissance des méthodes contraceptives. La méthode la plus utilisée et la plus connue est de loin le préservatif masculin, cité par un peu plus de 4 migrants sur 5, 85%. Ensuite vient la pilule, avec un peu plus de 3 migrants des migrants qui la connaissent. Les injectables pour 106%, les préservatifs féminins pour 44%, les implants pour 43%. Et la chirurgie semble la moins connue avec 9%. Donc ici, c'est l'utilisation actuelle de la contraception. Les produits donc, les plus utilisés par les migrants sont le préservatif masculin avec 109% des migrants. Donc, comme l'a confirmé au niveau de la connaissance, c'était le plus connu et ça devient le plus utilisé. Donc, c'est tout à fait logique. Ensuite vient la pilule avec 26% des migrants qui l'utilisent. Et le troisième produit, c'est les injectables, que 10% des migrants affirment avoir utilisé. Alors, 102%, donc nous passons aux IST. 102% des migrants déclarent connaître un centre de dépistage et de traitement des IST. 56% déclarent connaître un centre de dépistage du VIH. Cette même proportion des migrants dit avoir fait un test du VIH, alors que 19% des migrants se disent volontiers à faire ou à le refaire, ou à refaire le test du VIH. À la question, les 12 derniers mois, avez-vous eu des rapports sexuels en échange de cadeaux, d'argent ou de services? Il y a 51% des migrants qui ont répondu non. 28% disent avoir donné de cadeaux, de l'argent ou des services en échange de rapports sexuels. Et 19% déclarent avoir reçu des cadeaux, argent ou services en échange de rapports sexuels. Et enfin, 3% des migrants ont refusé de répondre à cette question. Donc, nous en venons à la conclusion et aux recommandations. Donc, cette analyse des données n'a concerné que les jeunes migrants en transit sans tenir compte des réfugiés. Initialement, c'était prévu qu'il y ait les réfugiés, mais malheureusement, donc, cette frange n'a pas été prise en compte dans cette étude. Donc, nous pensons qu'une étude spécifique sur la VBG et la SSR au niveau des camps de réfugiés de la région de Niamey et d'Agadez surtout va beaucoup mieux renseigner sur la situation des réfugiés en termes de risques et de vulnérabilité liés aux violences de la SSR. Une autre conclusion, cette étude n'a concerné que les jeunes migrants en transit à Niamey. Et donc, comme recommandation, il serait intéressant d'initier une étude similaire dans une autre région comme Agadez, qui constitue aussi un centre de transit par excellence des jeunes migrants. Et le processus de validation de ce protocole de recherche a été long. Le calendrier de réunion ne tient souvent pas des urgences d'enquête. Il faudrait que donc, le projet anticipe sur de telles situations pour respecter son propre calendrier. Donc, c'est vrai aussi, le contexte de Covid est venu retarder cette enquête. Donc, voilà ce que je tenais à vous exposer. Et je vous remercie pour votre aimable attention et nous sommes disposés pour les éventuelles questions d'éclaircissement, des observations d'amélioration, etc. Donc, merci beaucoup. Je vous remercie.
Thank you so much, Abdullah, for presenting the detailed insights of the youth migration study as pertaining to the drivers of migration and the needs of young migrants as obtained or interviewed in Niamey, Niger. We are seriously out of time. This last presentation was complementing the other two that we started with within the broader framework of the project that UNFPA and the Danish Refugee Council conducted in the 3 cities. I will now hand over to Professor Papa Demba Fall, who is our discussant, to have a few remarks, and then if we have a few minutes more, take a few questions. I see there's already one question in the chat box. Professor Fall is a director of research at the University Cheikh Anta Diop in Senegal, Dakar, Senegal. He is also a director of the African Migration Study Network in that esteemed university. Professor Fall, over to you. Your remarks, please. You are muted.
Sorry. Excusez-moi, je voudrais un certain nombre de à la suite de ce que j'ai entendu et des rapports que j'ai lus sur 3 grandes villes ouest-africaines, Bamako, Ouagadougou et Niamey au Niger. Je pense que l'intérêt de ce truc, c'est de confronter 3 espaces ouest-africains où évidemment le contexte peut influer sur le fonctionnement et même les résultats de recherche. Et c'est un peu aussi la complémentarité des papiers qui ont été présentés ou qui ont été exposés par écrit. je retiens une chose qui est importante, c'est que nous en sommes toujours à étudier les déterminants, c'est-à-dire les causes profondes de la migration, qui sont dictées par des raisons multiples, mais nous n'insistons pas souvent sur un aspect, c'est-à-dire l'effet changement climatique, la modification des conditions de vie et tout. On parle souvent de l'agriculture, les femmes parce que je pense que ce qui est important à noter ici, c'est qu'il faut comprendre la migration pour rappeler, tout le monde le sait, mais le rappeler, c'est important de tenir en compte ceci, c'est qu'en réalité, la mobilité, je parle au moins des mobilités, les différentes formes de migration, parce que ça a l'avantage d'englober différentes formes, sont dictées par un besoin ou un souci d'accéder à des ressources. Quand les ressources font défaut, là où on est, là où on habite, évidemment, on songe à partir. Et on n'a pas beaucoup vu, et c'est peut-être aussi des particularités, parce qu'on a quand même dans cette région qui est étudiée 3 grands pôles.
Sorry,
de
Prof,
migration.
may I interrupt you? Could we please raise the volume of the interpretation? It's quite low.
Excuse me.
Continue, Prof.
Is it okay? Like this? Can you hear me?
We can hear
Okay,
you
no.
well, but it's the interpretation that is low, the interpreter's volume, the translation.
Oh.
Thank you.
Is it okay for them now?
It's perfect now. Thank you.
OK, OK. Donc, j'expliquais ou je rappelais à nos auditeurs qu'il était important de noter que l'une des causes profondes de la migration, c'est le changement environnemental, l'effet du changement environnemental sur les localités d'où partent les migrants. Et on sait que la migration est aujourd'hui devenue, et c'est ça surtout l'intérêt de cette question, est devenue une stratégie d'accès aux ressources. Et que les gens partent parce qu'ils n'ont pas le choix dans certaines localités. Et c'est d'autant plus vrai que la cible que l'on retient ici, les jeunes, par exemple, sont victimes de cette situation. Leurs parents ne peuvent pas satisfaire leurs besoins. L'État ne peut pas satisfaire leurs besoins. Évidemment, ça devient très problématique pour eux et tous les moyens sont bons pour s'en sortir, comme on dit. Mais ce que je voudrais rajouter, c'est que tout dépend de l'orientation que l'on donne à son étude. Vous insistez davantage sur l'accès aux soins et des soins un peu de santé sexuelle, de reproduction. On aurait pu voir au-delà, mais évidemment, la recherche ne fait qu'éclairer un pan. On ne peut pas tout prendre en charge. Et en cela, l'échantillon qui est retenu permet valablement de parler de ces questions. Et vous ajoutez un peu aux déterminants de la migration, mais aussi aux conditions d'accès à la santé. Un autre aspect, une autre dimension qui aujourd'hui est prégnante, c'est la situation de pandémie que l'on vit ici. On sait depuis, j'allais dire, plusieurs années, plusieurs décennies, on étudie cette question de mobilité. Vous avez les travaux de Ali Ben Saad, vous avez les travaux de Julien Brachet, par exemple, qui ont éclairé et cherché à comprendre. Et c'est pour ça que je disais, nous prenons 3 grandes villes. Mais ces grandes villes, ce sont des zones de passage, ce sont des hubs, mais on pourrait s'intéresser, comme le dit un des intervenants, aux grandes villes carrefour comme Agadez, comme Nouadhibou, où il existe des travaux qui peuvent éclairer votre propos. Et ça, je pense qu'il faut bien se souvenir qu'il n'y a rien de nouveau, j'allais dire, sous le ciel. Ces travaux réactualisent un sujet et ce qui est surtout important, me semble-t-il, c'est de relever les spécificités et les nouveautés dans ces mouvements migratoires qui concernent essentiellement les jeunes. Parce qu'il ne faut pas oublier de rappeler et on ne cessera jamais de le faire, que l'atteinte des objectifs pour le développement durable passe par la maîtrise des questions démographiques. La question démographique, elle est extrêmement importante. Et ce dont nous manquons et que vous un peu remplissez dans cette présentation ou dans ces présentations, c'est qu'on manque de données genrées. On produit des données, mais on ne s'intéresse souvent qu'aux hommes. Et je pense qu'une chose importante, c'est que les femmes, les jeunes filles, garçons, participent de plus en plus à cette mobilité. Et il est bon de s'intéresser à leurs conditions de vie et de séjour dans ces localités. Et bon, maintenant, on fait ce que l'on peut avec des approches. Mais il va de soi. Et c'est peut-être là où je peux terminer parce que vous parlez de manque de temps. Je m'approche un peu pour qu'on entende bien. Il est important parmi les recommandations. Tout ce qui a été dit, oui, mais il faut l'inscrire dans le cadre d'une coopération sous-régionale. Ce n'est pas qu'un pays fasse ceci, qu'un autre fasse ceci. Il faut bien en arriver à définir une plateforme commune, des axes communs d'intervention. On peut par exemple proposer, comme ça a été fait une seule fois, me semble-t-il, depuis bientôt 30 ans, de faire des enquêtes simultanées dans différents pays. On approche les questions de migration par rapport à des territoires particuliers, mais il ne faut pas exclure la vision globale. Qu'est-ce que ça fait dans tel pays? Comment ça se passe dans tel autre pays? Et ça, c'est une interprétation de ce que nous appelons, nous, comment dirais-je, les associations ou les institutions sous-régionales qui sont parfois très muettes et loin de ces questions, qui ne prennent pas de décision en la matière. Et j'insisterai sur un aspect qui est extrêmement important. Tout à l'heure, on a expliqué que la plupart des migrants, il y en a qui rêvent d'Europe, il y a une soif d'Europe, du Nord, mais la plupart des migrants vont en Afrique. Et il faut trouver les moyens de leur proposer, de leur offrir les moyens de pouvoir se déployer en Afrique et de rester en Afrique. Mais dans le cadre d'une vision partagée. Et je regrette, me semble-t-il, que je pourrais dire que les institutions sous-régionales ne travaillent pas beaucoup sur cette question, tant à l'échelle sous-régionale qu'à l'échelle continentale. Quand vous êtes migrant ouest-africain, vous passez de l'autre côté en Afrique centrale, rien n'est prévu. Et la plupart des migrants d'ailleurs qui sont en Afrique de l'Ouest, qui viennent de pays membres de l'UECDAO, ne sont plus en règle au-delà de 3 mois parce qu'ils ne remplissent pas. Donc, il y a toute une éducation, toute une prise en charge. Il faut réinscrire ces questions-là. Et je voudrais terminer, enfin. Je disais, je me posais toujours la question quand je lis ces travaux, parce que nous, au même moment, nous travaillons sur la mobilité des femmes. Mobilité des femmes ouest-africaines, la mobilité transfrontalière. Et l'une des grandes équations auxquelles nous sommes confrontés, c'est que les migrantes, pour ne parler que d'elles, ont beaucoup de mal à s'exprimer sur cette question de transit. On sait qu'elles rêvent d'ailleurs, qu'elles veulent partir, mais elles ne l'avouent pas. Et je suis vraiment très intéressé par comprendre un peu comment vous pouvez identifier ces gens, à moins de tout, comment vous pouvez faire le distinguo entre ceux qui sont dans une migration d'installation et ceux qui sont dans une migration de circulation, qui envisagent de partir, de rebondir ailleurs. Je vois bien que quand le migrant est en difficulté dans un certain pays, il veut y rebondir en allant dans un autre pays, par exemple africain, ou dans un pays européen. On le voit bien. Donc, c'est là aussi une question qui me semble intéressante à aborder, à essayer un peu de traiter, de capitaliser pour un peu mieux comprendre la situation de ces migrants. Excusez-moi d'avoir été long, je m'en arrête là. Merci beaucoup. Ça va?
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Fall, for those remarks. You did not only just discuss, you raised a number of issues, questions that we need as researchers to go back into the drawing board and try to find means to address. We are officially beyond the allocated time for the program, but I think we still have a leeway of a few minutes to continue. I will allow, I will take questions, a few questions, then we wrap up. For you, Helen, there was a question from Sabine saying that did you find huge differences between male and female in terms of migration experience? I guess that question was answered by the presentation by Idris, looking at the experiences in Niamey, but maybe you can say a few words, Helen.
Yes. Thank you very much. And I would just like to spend
Helen, you're
1
muted.
minute to thank. No, I'm not. Do you hear me? Can you hear me now? Okay, thank you very much, Sandile. I would like to thanks very much, Professor
You are still muted,
Papaful.
Helen. We cannot hear you.
No, I'm not muted.
It's not
Can
your
you hear me now?
microphone. It's something else, because your microphone seems to be working.
Do you hear me now?
Can you try taking off your earphones and unplugging your external mic?
Do you hear me now?
No.
From here, we can hear you. From Senegal, we can hear you. I don't know in the other part of the world, but here.
Oh.
Oh, interesting.
Sorry, we were on interpretation. Go ahead.
Est-ce que vous m'entendez? Do you hear me
Okay,
now?
it seems we have some technical issues.
Yes,
other
you
parts
have
of the audience can hear, but others cannot. But Sabine, I think the question was answered by the presentation by Idris when looking at the situation in Niamey. I don't know if yes, Helena, you can respond on the chat. Let me see if we have another question. Okay, Sabine has responded in French. Do we have any other question? I don't see on the chat. Sabine is saying he heard the response. I mean,
Yes.
her question answered in the presentation from Niamey. Colleagues, because we are seriously out of time, I just want to thank the three presenters, Helen, who provided an overview of the youth mixed migration project focusing in the West African phase of the project, which covered 3 cities, Niamey in Niger, Ouagadougou in Burkina Faso, and Bamako in Mali, complementing work that was done in the first phase, where we did a similar study in 4 cities, including Tunis, Cairo, Beirut, and Nairobi. We also had a presentation by Clemens, which provided the results from the qualitative aspect of the study, because this study follows a mixed method approach. So Clemens outlined or provided an overview of the qualitative aspects of the study, and then Idris from Niger provided us with detailed insights from the study in Niger. And we had the detailed discussion from Professor Demba Fall, looking at the gaps that we still need to address going forward with the study, but also highlighting the powerful messages that came out of the study, which, as indicated in the presentations by Helen, Clemens, and Idris, is already showing us, giving us some recommendations of things that can be done by UNFPA and other development partners to address the needs of young migrants in these transit cities. With that, colleagues, because I don't see any other reaction, may I thank you all and officially close the session and hand over to Paul. Thank you.